Let's speak to Noga Tarnopolsky, freelance reporter in Jerusalem. Good morning, Noga.
Good morning, Matt.
It's good to speak to you. I recognise that place. You're somewhere opposite the King David Hotel, is that right?
You have a very good eye, Matt.
Yeah, no, it looks, I know, the weather is beautiful, and Jerusalem, of course, is a very beautiful historic city. But we've got more important stuff to discuss. Tell us about the mood in Israel today. I'm imagining it's one of great relief.
Not yet, there is relief, but there's also disbelief. And an enormous amount of trepidation about what you just mentioned, about everything that could still go wrong. And there's a tremendous fear that the leadership, frankly, on both sides, may still decide that it's more advantageous to them to keep this conflict even on a low flame going forward. So every single Israeli I have spoken to, and Palestinians, every Palestinian I've spoken to, the only universal among, 20 people I spoke to yesterday, is the fact that the relief is very, very much laced with fear and concern. It might also be connected to the fact that it's still hard to believe that the 2-year war suddenly is over. But there's not yet that kind of free eruption of joy that you're talking about.
Right. And I guess maybe that will happen if and when the hostages actually return, which is supposed to be on Monday. But, there is a difference, isn't there? When the hostages return to Israel, the bodies of the deceased ones and the living ones, then there is a form of closure there. I think for Gaza it'll be trickier because these people that we're seeing pictures of returning to North Gaza this morning or to Gaza City, they are returning to a pile of rubble that once used to be their home. And they're returning to, no obvious governance. Hamas is not supposed to govern the place. The replacement hasn't yet been decided on. You've got the threat of the IDF hanging over them all the time. You've got gangs, many which have been armed by the Israelis inside Gaza. They will wreak havoc. Their future looks pretty bleak at the moment, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It very much hangs in question right now. But I have to tell you that even before that, in the first phase that you just mentioned, there are many potential glitches. For example, in the original Trump plan, as it was presented, Hamas was given 72 hours to release all the hostages, the living and the dead, 72 hours from the moment Israel completed its redeployment within Gaza. So when we say that we expect the hostages to be freed by Monday at midday, it's just because it's 72 hours after the Israeli redeployment.
So it could take longer.
Yeah, or it could happen in 2 hours. We just don't know. But one thing we do know is that clause has been amended to include just the living hostages because Hamas has lost track, it appears, of some of the bodies of the deceased. So the first glitch that could happen in just very much the beginning of phase one is that the living hostages, let's say, will be released by Monday noon. And then, let's say 7, 8, or 10 bodies out of the almost 30 of the dead hostages will be released. I personally am also expecting there to be some, this is not like a Swiss clock here. So I think some of the hostages thought to be alive may end up being dead.
Yeah.
Maybe someone we thought dead will be alive. That has happened when the hostage Gadi Moses, aged 80, emerged from a Hamas vehicle. I remember I was stunned and I thought, oh my God, he's alive. So anything could happen. But the very first clearly visible glitch is if Hamas does not return all the bodies within a reasonable amount of time, Israel could declare this whole thing null and void. This is not beyond the realm of possibility.
And even if they are returned in a timely manner sometime at the beginning of next week, what guarantees are there and what's your feeling that the Israelis won't resume bombing of Gaza, saying, well, Hamas haven't given up their weapons, they haven't ruled themselves out of a future Palestinian Authority in Gaza. I'm afraid the war carries on.
Well, this is another very interesting point because the Hamas and principally the Qataris have gotten ironclad guarantees from the United States, and therefore Hamas now has something which is astonishing. When you realize that Hamas, a murderous terror group, they now have a guarantee from the United States and from Qatar, signed in a document, enshrined in a document that Israel will not return to war. My sense is that at least the more aware people in the Israeli government clearly understand now that they will not be able to return to fighting. We heard the foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, who definitely has been one of the hardliners here. He spoke with Fox News the other day and he said Israel's not planning to return to war, which is exactly the opposite of what Prime Minister Netanyahu is still trying to tell his base.
Yeah.
But I do not believe that Israel has leeway right now.
There are a couple of things under that are said in Hebrew to the Israelis that are not said in English to Donald Trump. One of them is a Palestinian state. Trump, put into his plan, as I just discussed with Arthur Lenk, that there will be a pathway to a Palestinian state. Netanyahu speaking in Hebrew very clearly last week, there will not be a Palestinian state ever. Which Netanyahu do we believe?
I believe as a journalist that we should be skeptical of all the Netanyahus. But I will point out that Netanyahu in English, just as recently as September 26th at the United Nations, Netanyahu thundered, there will never be a Palestinian state.
Right, okay. So maybe that's the Netanyahu we should believe, the one who says the same thing in Hebrew and in English. And finally, what about the man himself? I mean, he's in court on corruption charges. There are a lot of Israelis, even those who are relieved that there's a ceasefire and a hostage return, who absolutely hate him and want him out of power. What can we expect on that front? More demonstrations, elections, which have to happen next year, perhaps sooner? What do you think?
First of all, I would suggest everyone keep their eyes on Israel this evening. I expect there to be one of the largest demonstrations there have been in the last 2 years.
Demonstrations for what and against what?
For the end of the war and for the freeing of the hostages.
Right, okay.
Absolutely. The same as always, but I think it'll be bigger. Netanyahu is in a bit of a corner. As you just said, he's unpopular. He's even loathed by much of his population. But the thing is, he's by far the most powerful man in Israel. During this entire period, he has continued to unroll basically a kind of civilian coup d'etat. And as of last Sunday, he has an extremist, messianic, right-wing religious man, his own crony, who he put in as head of the Israeli equivalent of MI5, right? The Internal Security Service, the Shin Bet. And so I have a lot of trepidation, even about whether elections will be called in time and whether they will be free and fair elections. I think that Netanyahu right now is acting like a leader who's running scared and who's willing to do almost everything possible to stay in office.
Well, one thing we know is that when things move, when there are peace movements and ceasefires and things ease up a little bit, then the unexpected often happens. The known unknowns, suddenly rule the day, whether it's more demonstrations, a government change in Israel itself, elections with unexpected results. We simply don't know. All we know is that this is the beginning of a process, and I hope, Naga, you'll keep us abreast of it as it rolls on. Thank you very much indeed, Noga Tarnopolsky, for speaking to us from Israel, there from Jerusalem. Bassam, good morning to you.
Good morning.
It's good to have you on the program. How do you feel? How do you feel this morning when so much on the surface of it seems to have changed in this awful war in the last 24 hours?
In fact, I'm very happy, of course. We pray for this moment since 2 years to stop this genocide. But we always said this is the first step. It's not the last one. And because no one trusts Netanyahu at all, he will try to do everything possible not to make it, because he thinks he can continue doing what he's doing with the support of Trump. But I think it's a very good step. It's the first step to continue looking for a real solution for the whole problem.
What do the Palestinians, both in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip, now need to do in their terrible state, especially in Gaza, of coming back to homes that have been reduced to rubble. But what do they need to do to make sure that Hamas doesn't hijack this peace process, if for want of a better term?
I think the Palestinians know exactly what to do. It's not a really problem between Hamas and Israel. Hamas just exists yesterday, not before 75 years. They always need to find the title to fight it. And if Hamas a problem, it's a problem for the Palestinians, not for the Israelis. Hamas, we can eliminate it tomorrow morning if the Israelis decide to understand that only peace can guarantee their security. Only the Israelis on earth, only the place that, or the state that, they repeat the same thing again and they expect to see another end or another result. It's the only state on earth you cannot walk in it freely. They care about who rules Syria, who rules Gaza, who rules the West Bank, or Jordan, but they never understand that who rules them, who's the prime minister of Israel. They need to change their attitude.
Okay.
But I believe again.
If you were a Palestinian in Gaza, you could very reasonably argue that Hamas's attack and Islamic Jihad's attack on October the 7th created a reaction that has now left your place, your home, in total devastation. So what do Palestinians do if they have any political power or muscle or energy left at all to make sure that they are run in a way that is acceptable to them? Forget about Israel for a minute. It's acceptable to the Palestinians. What do they do? What do you do?
Only by elections. It means we need to have a solution so Hamas will never be in a power. Because again, it's harmed the Palestinians. I think it was wrong. But again, we cannot blame the Palestinians. So I believe through elections process, we can prove that the Palestinians, if they have a free state, they can elect the right people for their own interest.
And what does that freedom mean? And how does it come about? Would you, for instance, accept the custodianship, let's call it that, of the Gaza International Transitional Authority, or what I think some have called the Board of Peace, which Trump himself wants to chair? He wants Tony Blair on it. I mean, I've heard nothing but negative responses to that. But someone's going to have to basically, fix the plumbing, provide the water, make sure there's some modicum of peace and stability inside Gaza. Who should be responsible for that?
I think we can bring the Ukrainians to be responsible for us, or maybe the Irish people, which we love and respect, or maybe we will bring Blair again to remind us with the British mandate. It doesn't work, my friend. The Palestinians need to rule themselves, and they can do it. It's not a gang that they need to feed them and give them some water and some food and some medicine. We are talking about a political problem that exists more than 75 years. And the same Palestinian people can rule themselves, and they prove that. But under the occupation, we have no security, we have no freedom, we have no elections, we have no institutions. This is the main problem. And I believe this.
And are you saying, Bassam, that as in the attempts of the Palestinians to rule themselves, the Israelis will once again try to divide and rule you, to undermine you? Is that what you're saying?
This is exactly what they are doing since 2007. They try to make Gaza is another state and the West Bank it's another issue. Who prevent us to be together in a political mean? It's only Israel. This is their interest. And to say with whom we are going to negotiate, with Hamas or with the PLO, the Palestinian Authority. So when the UK and the other very important states declared that they recognize the Palestinian state, it was unbelievably very important to stop their dreams, to steal the West Bank and to kick Gaza outside of Gaza.
But at the end of the day, blaming Israel and, some of that blame is completely justified, but continuing to blame Israel is not going to get you very far. At the end of the day, it's Palestinians who have to rule themselves and be in charge of their own affairs. And, and you cannot succumb to the Israeli tactic of dividing and ruling. I mean, Israel helped to create Hamas, but then where was the uprising against Hamas from ordinary Palestinians in the Gaza Strip? The last time I was there 3 years ago for the last war, I spoke to so many Palestinians who hated Hamas, who didn't want Hamas to run the place, but they were too afraid to speak out. That's on you guys, isn't it?
Yes, no, I don't hate Hamas, and I'm not afraid to speak. I don't want Hamas in a normal situation to be the government because it's against my own view. At the same time, to blame Israel, it's Israel to blame. But it means if we have our own state, I will do my best not to let Hamas rule against, not because I hate them, because I don't agree with them. I want another state, another rule. So this is the problem. It's not to scare or to afraid to speak. No, we don't scare. We speak out again, but you mean to understand, it's very difficult to have this argument now. If it's Hamas, if it's Fatah, if it's another organization in the middle of this massacre, this is not the time because it doesn't work, because you cannot change. And this is what we hope. After any peace agreement, yes, we will raise up our voice against Hamas or against any other party that didn't keep those agreements.
Finally, Bassam, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most optimistic, how optimistic are you today that at the end of all this process, and God knows how many months or years it'll last, or decades, you will have what you have always dreamt of, which is an independent, viable Palestinian state that you can call your own?
I said 10 with very determination. Believe me, we are going with the circle of the history. We are the last occupation on earth. We are not the first or the last conflict. Imagine just a few years ago. Now there is peace between UK and France and Germany. The Palestinians didn't kill 6 million Israelis, and the Israelis didn't kill 6 million Palestinians yet. And there is a German ambassador in Tel Aviv. There is an Israeli ambassador in Berlin. It means we can do it.
Okay.
And today the world cannot accept these atrocities anymore.
Bassam Aramin, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us.